Alrighty, welcome back to part 2 of the article about Henry Leland and Henry Ford. This is where Henry Ford enters the picture in the Lincoln Motor Company, so we'll start here. During the Liberty Engine period, there had been a certain amount of camaraderie between HM and Henry Ford. Ford also was building Liberty engines, had a badge which gave him access to the Lincoln plant, and he was a frequent visitor there, observing manufacturing methods and discussing problems of mutual concern with HM, the master of precision volume production. During Lincoln's prior financial trials, Wilford had offered Ford a piece of excess factory property. Ford was not interested. Wilford told him that if he did not find help soon, the other directors would apply for receivership. Ford said, "After they do, come and see me." Wilford did this, and on November 14th met with Henry and Edsel Ford. Since Lincoln would be for sale, it was to the Lelands' great interest to find a buyer who would pay a reasonable price for the assets, who would honor its obligations to stockholder, the major ones being the Lelands, and suppliers, and would keep the Lelands at the helm of the company on which they had stacked everything they had. This led to a series of meetings with Ford and his executive staff, and by November 21st, Wilford was satisfied that the basic agreement had been reached on all these points. When he asked that this be put in writing, Ford, one of the world's most fabulously wealthy men, said, "Mr. Leland, we know each other. I will take care of everything." Wilford, in the most tenuous of bargaining positions, accepted the oral promise. On December 29, 1921, Supervising Judge Arthur J. Tuttle was present in a meeting between the Lelands, Edsel Ford, and his attorney Harold Edmonds. According to Tuttle, Ford agreed to meet the Lelands' terms, stating that his motives were not mercenary, but sprang from a desire to help the Lelands and to save the industry which they had created for Detroit. Ford said that he would be willing to pay $5 million for Lincoln. This was an improvement over the $2 million that the Murphy faction was known to be planning to pay for the company it had wrecked, but it still did not approach the assets which had cost $16 million and which the Lelands valued at $50 million. Judge Tuttle refused to let the property go for less than $8 million. There was over $9.5 million in liabilities. On January 11, 1922, the Detroit News ran a feature story based on exclusive interview with Henry Ford. Under the headlines, "Ford Saves Lelands." The story stated that Ford neither wanted nor needed Lincoln, but was prepared to intervene in the situation out of motives of benevolence, sentiment, and charity. It was stated that Ford would try to take care of the Lincoln stockholders. Said Ford, quote, "It would be a stain against the motor car industry and against Detroit to permit outsiders to secure control of the Lincoln plant merely because the Lelands have been caught in a financial pinch," unquote. The Lelands were euphoric over their deliverance and helped to discourage other bids from their bankrupt company. The press was almost universally adulatory of Ford, but one editor, who was not, wrote, "The deal looks to us like one in which Ford saw a chance to pick up a good plant and something of a going concern at a bargain, and he is going into it on that basis. It rather grates to see the venerable Henry Leland pictured in the role of a mendicant to satisfy Ford in another of his advertising stunts." The sale took place on the steps of the Lincoln plant on February 4th. There were 3 competing bidders. When bids were called for, attorney Emmons bid $8 million for Henry Ford. The other bidders, who made deposits, obligingly stepped down. "Sold," shouted the auctioneer, and a band that happened to be in the crowd of 3,000 broke into playing "Hail to the Chief." Before the sale, Wilford had asked Ford to specify how the Lelands, the major stockholders by far, would be remunerated. "Mr. Leland," said Ford, "you just leave that to us. We're going to do what is right by you." On February 16th, a party was held in the plant in honor of HM's 79th birthday. Henry and Edsel Ford attended and presented HM with an investment certificate of $363,000, which represented the par value of his Class B stock in the former company. All the stockholders leaped to the conclusion that they would receive similar treatment. The Leland Lincoln V8 chassis was built to absolutely unprecedented standards of precision and quality, and was judged by many independent authorities to be the finest automobile in the world at the time. Shortly after the sale, a large group of Ford execs visited the Lincoln plant to look at the layout, methods, and processes with the view of improving them, or, if worthy, of adopting them for other Ford plants. The following day, a horde of Ford workmen arrived and began reorganizing the plant, starting with the demolition of one of the walls of HM's private office. This was the bare beginning of the executive takeover by Ford personnel, and it was characterized by studied insult and provocation. Lincoln's existing management was consistently ignored, bypassed, and its directives countermanded. These, of course, were very typical Ford tactics. Samuel S. Marquis wrote in his Henry Ford interpretation, quote, "If the work of certain clerks in the shop is not wanted, why tell them so? Smash their desk. Expensive tools of skilled workmen are scattered over the floor. Foolish, insulting, humiliating? No. It takes the conceit out of a man who prides himself on his work." The situation was chaotic, hellish. The Lelands found new financial backing, and Wilford called Henry Ford asking to buy Lincoln back. "Not for $500 million, Ford said. Wilford put his request in writing. It was ignored, and so was the second. When the third reached Ford, he sent a pair of executives on June 10th, 1922 to evict the Lelands and all of the personal belongings from the plant on that same day. They were handed 2 weeks' severance salary and were told that the final settlement would be made for them within a few days. It never was. After attempted evasion, Ford did, to pay his credit, pay off all the Lincoln suppliers, bringing the total price for which he paid Lincoln to $12 million and change. Next came Ford's promise to repay the stockholders. It had been an oral one, and even though it had been witnessed by Judge Tuttle, it remained oral and tended to elude the memories of Henry and Edsel Ford. The Lelands began to fight, first by publishing lengthy reports on the entire history of the case. They tried to bring enough public pressure on Ford to cause him to make his promise good. But Ford, even though he had the strongest ambition to become president of the United States and was highly sensitive about his public image, ignored this tactic entirely. The next step was a full-scale legal action. With support of 1,800 stockholders, and after years of preparation, the Lelands initiated a suit on November 16, 1927, in the Circuit Court in Pontiac, Michigan. The complaint asked for $6 million for reimbursement of Lincoln stockholders. The Ford attorneys did not argue the case, but moved that it be dismissed on the grounds that the agreement was invalid and unenforceable. This motion was overruled on March 15th and was appealed by the Ford attorneys to the Michigan Supreme Court on June 7, 1928. The final decision was handed down on February 1st of 29. 4 judges were in favor and 3 against. The Ford attorneys claimed that the agreement was invalid on 3 counts. 2 of these were rejected by the court, but the third was sustained, said the court. What we do hold, and it is all that the purposes of the case require, is that after they, the Lelands, publicly announced that they were going to look after the interests of stockholders, if they acted at all, their duty required them to act for all, not for a portion of the stockholders. I contract for the reorganization of a corporation which contemplates the taking of a proportion only of the stockholders and the exclusion of another portion from the benefits of the reorganization is fraudulent and cannot stand. The man who bought a share of stock for $3 acquired the same interest in the company as the man who paid $50 for a share of the company's stock, unquote. How much a person has paid for his stock was the farthest thing from Leland's minds. What they were fighting for was a reimbursement of each and every stockholder, above all that of the small investors such as the company employees who had put in their faith in the Leland management. The Lelands lost no chance to emphasize that they would accept no reimbursement until all other deserving stockholders had been paid for their stock. That exception wrecked their case. Because of this, all hope was lost, and H.M. died on March 26, 1932, hardly rewarded abundantly for a life of towering service to community, nation, and civilization. 20 years later, his son assigned himself his life's last major task, writing, with his wife's strong help, the story of his father's life and fortunes. The research alone was a staggering undertaking, and the two worked at it together for years. In 1958, Wilford died, but Ottilie, loyal to his wishes, devoted another 7 years to the most accurate rendering of the Leland story. Master of Precision, Henry M. Leland, was published last June by the Wayne State University Press of Detroit. It is a precious contribution to the automotive literature and to American history. Since completing the book, Mrs. Leland has received corroborating evidence supporting her account of the negotiation and litigation between the Lelands and the Fords over acquisition of the Lincoln Company. This evidence was in the form of a written communication from Leland's attorney, William Henry Gallagher, of the prominent Detroit firm Gallagher & Paul, whom she did not know was still alive. Gallagher quotes from a conversation he had with Justice Nelson Sharp of the Michigan Supreme Court after the court had decided against the Lelands. Quote, I chanced to meet him in the corridor of the Capitol one day and mentioned the Leland case. He explained, that was an outrage. But the majority of the court felt that If we decided in your favor, Mr. Ford would have to settle. I answered, is that a good reason for denying justice? He replied, well, you know how I felt about it. He had written an opinion in our favor, unquote. This author had the unforgettable honor of being a close friend to Wilford Leland for many years, and of hearing this whole saga from his own lips. His bitterness against the Ford was unquenchable. But he also and unhesitantly gave Henry and Edsel credit for maintaining, through 1933, very faithfully most of the traditions of quality which were basic to the Leland concept of the finest car in the world, the Lincoln. So that's a recap of the article there about Henry Ford, Henry Leland, the Cadillac Motor Company, and Lincoln Motor Company. Just this very interesting story most people don't know about, and I want to thank Motor Trend February issue from 1967 for that great article that really explains what happened between the Lelands and the Fords and GM and just the whole story. And thanks again for watching.